It's good to see everyone. I like when we shake hands stuff in the beginning, because we say Happy Sabbath, but then we sit there and not move at all. So it's good to get one of that. All right, let's pray before we start. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for everything you do for us. Thank you just for the opportunity we have to come before you and to worship you. We don't deserve anything you give us, but you give us so much anyway, and we pray that we can just reflect that love to other people as well. You're right, pray, amen. So as we mentioned in the prayer request, this week, if you have the internet, which is basically everyone, you heard that Steve Jobs passed away. Everyone was really shocked. Everyone was really surprised. I was actually in Irvine when I found out. I was getting ready for the Can UCI Bible study, and we were at Lee's Sandwiches, and they have TVs in there, and it was like all over the TVs, and that's how I found out. But it's really crazy that this happened because I'm most shocked because he was pretty young. He was only 56, and he done so much. Also with Apple, everyone knows. He helped start Pixar, and so that was a really big deal. And people said one of the ways you can tell that he made a really big impact, or something that was really interesting about his death, is that most people heard about his death, or a lot of people heard about his death on something that he invented. And even if you don't have like an iPhone or a MacBook, just the advances that Apple made pushed other companies to make their products similar to theirs. And so he really pushed a lot of technology and stuff. And I thought it was really interesting because no matter what website I went on that day, there was something about Steve Jobs. Like, obviously if you go on like the news, or if you go on like just websites that talk about a lot of different things, he was on there. But I went to like ESPN and it was a headline. I went to like MLB.com to check the playoffs and it was a headline. And so it's crazy because everywhere I went on the internet, they were talking about it. Even though it was pretty shocking, even though everyone's really sad, even though it was pretty surprising, if you had been paying attention to like tech news and just Apple and what's going on, you kind of knew this was coming. Recently he resigned a while ago. He stopped doing public appearances. Apple had their big announcement of the iPhone 4S, and he didn't do it. And so you could tell that his health was deteriorating. And so, if you had been paying attention, you kind of knew like, oh, this was going to happen. After he passed away, people talked a lot about the end of his life and what he was doing. And I watched his video yesterday, and it was talking about what he focused on as his life was coming to an end, because he kind of knew it was coming too. And it was saying he was working on this project, and it wasn't like some crazy new Apple project. It wasn't the iPhone 5. It wasn't some fancy new like laptop that would totally like change the game. He worked on this box, and it was just a small box with a letter in it, and that letter was for his wife. And he knew his life was ending. He spent his last days with his family, in his house with his son, spending time with them. When your life is winding down, you really think about what you're going to say or what you're going to do. That's why we remember people's last words, because we feel like, oh, that's so important what they say. And as you realize that like your days are fleeting, you really appreciate the time that you have. And so, Steve Jobs spent that time with his family. Even though he was this big like tech guy, he was this big computer like innovator, this genius or whatever people want to call him. In the end, he was a family man. And at the end of your life, it really shows like who you are. And it is at this point in Joshua's life that we're going to look at this sermon today. We know Joshua because he's this general. He's led the Israelites through tons of battles. He's been really successful. He's been a great leader for them. But today we're going to look at the end of his life. After all this stuff happens, after he's done everything, what he says at the end. So if you have your Bible, turn to Joshua chapter 23. Joshua chapter 23, verse 1. And it says, "After a long time had passed, and the Lord had given Israel rest from all their enemies around them, Joshua by then, a very old man, summoned all of Israel, their elders, leaders, judges, and officials, and said to them, I am very old." Verse 3, "You yourselves have seen everything the Lord your God has done to all these nations for your sake. It was the Lord your God who fought for you." Basically, throughout the rest of chapter 23, Joshua is talking to them. And he knows, he said, I'm very old. And he knows his life is coming down to an end. And, he's led the Israelites. He knows he's still their strong leader. He's still the leader of them. And so he knows that what he says here will be very important. And so he has his last speech. And it's interesting because so many times the speeches that Joshua gives, or just the leaders of the church give, or leaders of the Israelites give, so many times it's the commandments. They give the commandments over and over again because they're so important for the Israelites to remember. We always look at the 10 Commandments in Exodus 20, but they're repeated a few other times because, they needed to make sure that this is what they knew. But at the end of his life, this isn't what he does. He's not talking about the commandments. He's not saying, make sure that you eat these and don't eat this, and don't touch this and don't touch that. That's not what he does at the end. In the end, in verse 11, this is basically the summary of his speech. In verse 11. "So be very careful to love the Lord your God." That's how to summarize his last, or this is his second to last speech, but that's to summarize it. He says, make sure that you love the Lord your God. As his life is going down, he knows that his leadership is starting to end. He wants to make sure that they know, love the Lord your God. In the very next chapter, chapter 24, after he tells them, make sure you love the Lord your God, he gathers up the Israelites again. And this one is his very last speech he gives. And here he renews the covenant that they have with God. And he starts talking to them, and he has his speech, and it's basically summarized in what we read in Scripture today. Joshua 24, verse 14 and 15. And this is like the main point of his very last sermon, or his very last speech that he gave. And it says, "Now fear the Lord, and serve him with all faithfulness. Throw away the gods your ancestors worshipped beyond the Euphrates River and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your ancestors served beyond the Euphrates, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are living. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord." This is the last thing he's going to say to them before he passes away. And he's not telling them, good job. He's not telling them, be really happy about what you're doing. He's not just saying like, oh, I want to sound really wise, like here's some stuff I learned. But he's telling them like, you need to make a decision now. He's telling them, you have to be decisive and decide what you're going to do. Who are you going to serve? Are you going to serve God or serve the other gods? It seems kind of weird to have this decision for them because these are God's people. You would think that God's people would be the last people who need to decide, am I going to serve God? But it was really important for them. He's challenging these Israelites, saying, you have to decide now, who will you serve? At this time, they've gone through a lot of land. They've gone through a lot of enemy territory, and they've managed to settle here. They've defeated the Amorites, and they're in that land now. And so basically all around them is other tribes, other people who don't worship God. And so Joshua knows that as we settle here, we're going to interact with them, and you're going to want to marry some of them because they're really attractive or something. But as we're going through our lives, you have to decide right now, before we do any of this, are you going to serve God or are you going to serve yourself? Are you going to serve God, or are you going to serve the gods of the land? You know, he tells them right now, like, you can't be indecisive. You have to make a decision now and stick with it. You know, I generally have a problem with being indecisive. I'm not the most decisive person in the world. When I was younger, there was this one place I always wanted to go. Like, I always dreamed of going there. It wasn't Disneyland. It was Toys R Us. I loved Toys R Us. I remember, like, every week my mom went grocery shopping. She would take me and my sister, and then we would always drive past Toys R Us on the way home. If you live in like Roland Heights or Diamond Bar, you know which one I'm talking about. It's like the one right after 60, across from like the mall. We always passed that one every time I went home. And every time I'd look at it and be like, oh, I just want to go in like really quick, like please. And we never went to Toys R Us. You know, like, you don't care that like the R is backwards. You don't care that an R, not the word. And you know, I didn't really know what was in there. I just knew there was like a lot of cool stuff. And you know, it just seemed magical almost. You know, you just know that whatever's in there is going to be amazing. And then this one time, on my 6th birthday, my uncle actually took me to Toys R Us. And he didn't just take me and like buy and like get me something. He took me and said, okay, I want you to pick something, and I'll get it for you because it's your birthday. I'm pretty sure he had like a price limit, but I was 6, I didn't know these things. And so, you know, I went in there and, you know, giving a 6-year-old, like, just a free reign in a toy store, that is so much power. I think I can literally say I never had that much power in my life before. To just go in there and be able to choose, like, I want this for myself, and then I would get it. And so this was a very important decision. You know, this is something that I'd never done before. And so I wanted to make sure that I made the right choice. And so I went in and I started looking at all the toys, and I'd go down one aisle, I'd like pick one up, and then I'd look at, oh, this is really cool. And like, oh, but there's so much other stuff. I'd like put it down, I'd go to another aisle, pick something else up, like, oh, this is really cool. Oh, but the thing next to it is also cool too. So I'd look at the two of them, I'd compare, think about like, oh, which one would be more fun. And then I'd like put it down, and then like, I would get one, and I'd just carry it on with me, and he'd ask like, oh, is that what you want? It's like, no, I'm still deciding. And so I'd like carry it and take it to other aisles, be like, is this better or is this better? And it took us forever. We were there for like an hour. My 6-year-old self didn't remember this because, you know, I'm in a toy store with choices, like, I'm not gonna keep track of time. But I think my uncle knew, and he probably like mentioned it to my family because they made fun of me for a long time about that. But we were in there for a long time, and I was really indecisive because, you know, like, I didn't want to mess up. I wanted to make sure that I had the right choice. And, you know, when you really think about it, like, I'm a 6-year-old in Toys R Us. I can't go wrong. But, you know, at the time, I just really wanted to make sure I got the right toy. And so after like an hour, I finally decided. And I ended up with a G.I. Joe robot. I actually have a picture of it. I was surprised I found it. I was looking online yesterday. Can you show the picture? This is something only a 6-year-old would want. If you look at it, okay, so there's a gun on the chin, there's a gun in the arm, there's 2 guns on the head. And the arm is a claw, and there's no feet, it's like wheels. Yeah, apparently I was one of the few people that bought this because they sold this for 1 year and then they canceled it. So I did not have good taste when I was 6. I thought it was awesome, I loved it. When I was looking it up, I missed it. I wanted to buy another one. But, you know, I was in there for so long because I wanted to make sure, you know, I have to make the right decision. And I was so indecisive about all these things. Like, because really, I could have bought anything else and I would have been fine. If I had bought, like, a Power Ranger toy, I would have loved that toy for like, forever. I would still love it now. If I bought, you know, like, anything else, I would be really happy. But back then, I just couldn't make a decision. Even now, I'm still kind of like this. I still, like, you know, if I have to make a decision, I still think about it a lot. In fantasy sports leagues, I'm the worst person to make a trade with because it's not that I'll reject your trade, it's that I'll leave it open for like 3 weeks thinking about whether or not to do it, and then I'll reject your trade. Because I just keep thinking, like, what if it's the wrong decision? You know, what if I trade them and then my players do really well? Or what if I trade them and then their player gets injured and so I'm stuck with half a team? And so, you know, it's, you know, like, I'm really indecisive a lot. And so, you know, this was like the ultimate story of my indecisiveness, like coming to like, you know, the amount of time that was wasted, what I ended up with, and just like how old I was. It's just, this is like the perfect example of what I was like, or how I'm indecisive. And, Israelites can't be like this. Israelites can't be like me. They can't sit there and think like, what are we going to do? Should we worship God? Should we serve God? Should we serve the gods of the land? I mean, we're here anyway. They're going to, persecute us if we don't. What if we want to marry one of them? We might have to worship one of their gods. And so they're not able, or they shouldn't think like that. They can't be indecisive because it's going to hurt them. In the end, this was just a toy. It was okay that I was indecisive, whatever. But, for them, like, they can't do that. They have to make some kind of choice. Even if they don't make a choice right away and they just think about it, that's kind of like making a choice. There's a quote online. It says, when you have to make a choice and don't make it, that in itself is a choice. And so for them, like, they have to decide now. The timing, like I said, is so important. They're in this land, they're gonna settle, they're gonna live here for a while. They need to decide right now, what kind of people are we gonna be? Are we gonna serve God, or are we just gonna be just like everyone else? This is a very hard choice for them. Are we gonna be different? Are we gonna serve God, or are we gonna serve the gods of these people? What are we gonna do? They have to make this decision. They're gonna live in this land, surrounded by all these other people, and so they need to make this decision. And so, luckily they're not like me, and you can stop showing that now. Luckily they're not like me, and they make their decision pretty quickly. Turn to Joshua 24, verse 16. Joshua 24, verse 16. It's the very next verse that we're reading. It says, "Then the people answered, 'Far be it from us to forsake the Lord to serve other gods.'" And so they decide, we're going to serve God. We're not going to forsake God to serve the other gods. God has done so much for us. Why would we forsake Him? We can't turn on Him and worship the gods here. And so, they responded very well. They responded in like the perfect way. This is exactly what they were supposed to do. And, we can look at them and be very proud. But the thing about this question is that this question doesn't end at that time. It's not asked only there. But this question is asked to basically every single person. Are we going to serve God, or are we going to serve the world? Are we going to serve God, or are we going to serve what everyone else around us serves? Whatever that God may be. We don't always realize that we need to make this decision. We don't always realize it because we don't have someone standing up here pointing at us and saying, you need to decide now what you're going to do. We don't get that a lot. It's easy to just float along and like not make a decision and just kind of do whatever you want to do and then push this decision till later, without realizing that in itself is a choice. We can't be indecisive about this. There's a story about Ronald Reagan when he was about to be president. His aunt, or I think he was younger, like it's pretty early in his life, but he had an aunt who took him to a cobbler to make a pair of shoes. If you don't know, cobblers make shoes. If you figure that out from the sentence, but they went to the cobbler and then he asked Ronald Reagan, like, do you want square toes or round toes? Because in dress shoes, your toes can either be square or round. I usually like round just because the idea of square shoes seem kind of weird. But I'm actually wearing square toes right now because they were a gift. And when I look down, it kind of makes sense. But he asked Ronald Reagan, like, do you want square toes or round toes? Everyone's looking at my feet now. Do you want square toes or round toes? And Ronald Reagan is, he's young. He hadn't like dressed up a lot, and so he's not sure what he wants to do. And so so the cobbler says, I'll give you a few days. I'll let you decide. A few days later, the cobbler saw Reagan on the street, and he asked him, did you decide what kind of shoes you want? And Ronald Reagan said, I still don't know. I still can't decide. I'm not sure which one would be better. Like round shoes look nice, but squares have that like, they look sophisticated, or I don't know, whatever. And he tells, and then the cobbler says, all right, come to my store in a few days, and they'll be ready for you. I'll make a decision for you. And so, Ronald Reagan, a few days later, goes to the store, and the cobbler gives him the pair of shoes. One square toe and one round toe. And Ronald Reagan, or the cobbler said, this will teach you. Never let people make decisions for you. And Ronald Reagan said, I learned that day, like, I have to be decisive. I have to make my own decisions and not let other people make decisions for me. And, too often this is what we do. We don't realize it because we're not getting physical objects. We're not actually getting something, but, too often we let someone else make decisions for us, and we don't realize it. I talked to a lot of high school students about college, give them some advice, and I talked to some college students about, how they're doing in college, see how they're doing, and nowadays with like the economy and like tuition, basically with like tuition going up and everyone having less money, community college is something that a lot more people are thinking about doing. And I tell people that like it's a good idea, but the one piece of advice I always give with community college is that don't listen to anyone from the school, because people go to community college with the intention of going there for a little bit and transferring out. But the goal of the community of the college itself is not for you to do that. They're not there for you to transfer. They're there to give you an education for 4 years, while you just want like a 1 or 2 year education. And so if you go and you ask your advisor like, oh, what classes should I take or what'll be good, they'll tell you, oh, these classes are very interesting and you can learn a lot, which they are interesting and you can learn a lot, but they won't help you transfer out. And so if you go to community college, you need to know like these are the classes I need to take. I can't let these advisors make these choices for me. I need to know what I need to do so that I can get out and get my goals that I want. And in the same way, like in our spiritual life, like we let other people make decisions for us. It's not as obvious, it's not as simple as this, but we still, we don't make our own decision for ourselves. It's because most of us were raised in the church. We came when we were little. We can't really decide at that point because we don't understand everything. But then when we are at the age where we can make the decision, we don't really have to, and so we don't. And by the time we are faced with this decision, it's kind of too late. Generally, I've noticed that this decision, or the decision for yourself, whether or not you want to serve God, it happens more like in college or anytime after college, because at that point you're more independent. You're living on your own, or you're dorming on your own. You decide by yourself, like, am I going to go to church or not? And then after you graduate, you're like totally independent, and it's your own life. And so you can make your decision for yourself. But the timing of it is just so much harder. For these Israelites, if they had waited like a few years and waited until they were settled in and interacting with people to make this decision, then it would have been too late, because they're already interacting with people. They probably made some compromises already. They probably like started worshiping the gods, at least just a little bit, in some way, doing some minor things with the other gods. And that's why it was important for them to do it now, before they fully settle, before they really just make that place their own. They decide now, we're going to serve God. And in the same way, like before we go off and get involved with all these other things that aren't from God, we need to decide, am I going to serve God or not? And so we need to follow the example of the Israelites. When we're faced with this decision, when we think about this decision, whether we've had the opportunity or not, it's going to come again. And so we need to follow their example, follow the example of the Israelites, and do what they did. And choose the right answer for God. The way that we know that God is the right answer is the same way that the Israelites knew, because they don't just randomly decide. In the Bible, a lot of times when they have to make a serious decision, you see them casting lots, which basically is kind of like rolling dice and then asking God's Spirit to guide it. And this is not one of those decisions. They don't do anything like that. The way that they make these decisions is by looking at their past, their present, and their future. And that's the same way that we can make decisions, by looking at our past, our present, and our future. Turn back to Joshua 24, and we're going to see what they did when they looked at their past. Joshua 24, verse 5. Well, we won't read all of verse 5, or it's kind of a lot, but when Joshua is giving his speech, his last speech, before he gives them the decision, before he gives them the challenge, he reminds them, this is what God has done for you. This is what this is how you've come here. God has protected you in so many ways. And so in verse 5 he says, I sent Moses and Aaron, and I afflicted the Egyptians by what I did there, and brought you out. When I brought your people out of Egypt, you came to the sea, and the Egyptians pursued them with chariots and horsemen as far as the Red Sea. But they cried to the Lord for help, and he put darkness between you and the Egyptians. He brought the sea over them and covered them. You saw with your own eyes what I did to the Egyptians. And you lived in the wilderness for a long time. And then he goes through and he keeps talking about, as they went through the promised land, or as they went to find the promised land, as they, the battle of Jericho and the walls of Jericho. And he just goes through all the different things that God, the ways God protected them, and all the ways that God brought them here and all the ways God provided for them. And if you look in verse 17, people know this. When they respond, well, starting verse 16, when the people answered, "Far be it from us to forsake the Lord to serve other gods. It was Lord our God himself who brought us and our parents up out of Egypt from that land of slavery and performed those great signs before our eyes. He protected us on our entire journey and among all the nations through which we traveled. And the Lord drove out before us all the nations, including the Amorites who lived in the land. We too will serve the Lord because he is our God." God provided so much for the Israelites, and so when they need to make this decision, that's what they rely on. They know God did so much for us, he protected us, we're here in this land because of him. How can we turn away from him? Because of their past with God, they know, I want to continue to serve him. I want to continue to follow him. And, when we look at our past, we can see, God has been there for us. Maybe not in the ways that we planned, maybe not the ways that we asked for, but God has been there for us. Earlier in Sabbath school with high school today, we talked about prayer, and we talked about, sometimes we don't get what we ask for, but after a while we realize that it works out better for us in the end. And you know what, it doesn't always work out that way, but overall, God takes care of us. He provides for us, and we're here because of that. And when we look back in our lives, we can see there are these times that God really takes care of us. If you look in the Bible, if you look in the history of the Israelites, so many of them had a lot of trouble, but God still provided. When you look at the story of Joseph, Joseph didn't plan on being sold into slavery. Joseph, that's not something that you think would end well, but it did. He was arrested for a crime he didn't commit, and that worked out in the end. And what's amazing about that is that this spot where Joshua is talking to them, this spot where Joshua is giving this speech, that's where Joseph was sold, or that's where Joseph is buried, because that's a huge landmark in Joseph's life, this spot. And so he's saying no matter what, God will take care of you. And so when you look at the past, look at your past, look at the Israelites' past, the history of God's people, he takes care of you. He takes care of you. He provides for you, and you know that if we serve him, that we will be okay. In the Israelites, also when they look at their present, when they looked at where they were, verse 18, they were in this land that belonged to Amorites. Generally they fought a lot of wars trying to get to where they were, and they weren't always the strongest people. Sometimes the other tribes were a lot bigger or a lot stronger, a lot more well prepared. But somehow they always won, and they knew that it was because of God. And so they're saying, because we're living in this land now, we know that God protected us. The place that we're living, what we're doing now, our life today, we owe to God. And it's the same for us. The lives that we live now, what we do now, what we have now, the blessings that we have from God. We enjoy these things because of God. And lastly is, when we look at the future, when we look at our future, we know God promises so much. And when you think about whether or not to serve God, serving the world seems so not exciting, but it seems like it'll be all fun and interesting. All the stuff that is out there is all shiny and nice, but we know how everything ends. We know how things end if you put the world first instead of God. In 1 John chapter 2, verse 15 to 17. 1 John chapter 2, verse 15 to 17. They talked about this. And it says, "Do not love the world or anything in the world. If anyone loves the world, love for the Father is not in them. For everything in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, comes not from the Father, but from the world. The world and its desires pass away, but whoever does the will of God lives forever." We can look at this and look at this as the future. If we choose to serve God and choose to serve God instead of the world, we know that we can live forever. We can live with God forever, while all the stuff on the earth passes away. While all the stuff just fades away, all the earthly possession is gone, we will be with God forever. And so when we look towards the future, we know that serving God pays off so much more than if we serve the world. That's really hard, especially me and my friends right now, we don't have money. We're all recent graduates who don't have like full-time jobs, and a lot of them are in school, and we don't really have money. And so when we sit around eating like our cheap meals and like hanging out and doing nothing that costs money, a lot of times like my friends will say, in like 10 years I'll be making this much, so whatever, it's okay, then we'll play it. And my other friend who's like in med school will be like, yeah, me too, in 10 years I'll be making this much, and so we can like have fun. And I'm like, yeah, in 10 years you guys will be making a lot of money, and I'll hang out with you maybe. And it's really tempting to like look around and be like, like there's so much out there that seems really fun, but when you realize that that's not what's gonna last, and that's not what we should focus on, and that's really like that's not what matters. What matters is having this eternal life with God. It's so much, so much more. It lasts so much longer, and that's a big reason why like we should make this decision to follow God. I want to end with a story. It's really similar to the Toys R Us story because it's about me and I'm still indecisive. But when I was a little bit older, I was like 6 when I was Toys R Us. When I was like in like 5th grade or like 4th to 6th grade, pretty much. Every Friday after school, my mom would take us shopping, or she would go shopping and she would take us with her because I don't know why. I don't know. We just went. And we would go grocery shopping, we'd go to the Korean market, buy a bunch of stuff. And then her and my sister would go shopping for clothes. And I hate shopping for clothes. Like, I really hate shopping for clothes. Even now, I don't like shopping for clothes. Like, if I need to buy something, I'll go to the store, I'll look for 5 minutes. If I don't find it, I'm gone. Because I don't want to stay there for too long. And like, I don't know, I don't like trying on clothes in the store. I don't know why. But, and that's now. Back then, it was like way worse. And I'm not even shopping back then. I'm standing there while my sister and my mom are shopping. And I'm holding their bags, I'm holding the clothes that they're gonna buy, or just try on later and not buy, but I'm holding for like 30 minutes. And so like, I really didn't like going with them. And so after a while, I realized this mall has an arcade in it. And so I asked my mom for some money and I would go. But, like going to arcade, I realize now it's kind of a waste of money. And so my mom knew this back then, and so she would only give me $1. And if you've ever been to an arcade, $1 lasts you like 30 seconds because you play a game and you die and then you're done. And so, like if they're shopping for like 45 minutes and I'm gone for like 30 seconds, like I knew like I would just be back right away and there'd be no point. And so I would go and I would try to make that dollar last as long as I could. Or I knew that I couldn't just waste it. So I would go and I'd look at all the games. Similar to like the toy store, I would look at all the games and try to think, what should I play? What can I do to maximize my dollar? Because like I would look at like the really fun games, but they were $1. So it's like I can't play that. I'll be gone right away. And so I'd look at like the 50-cent games and be like, oh, that's still too much. Like I'm not very good. I'm not gonna last long. And then I'll look at like NBA Jam or like X-Men and think, oh, those are really fun. Maybe I should play it. But the thing is, no matter what, like every time I went to the arcade, I did this. And every single time, I ended up playing the same game. And it was the Simpsons arcade game. It was 25 cents. I love the Simpsons. And I don't know, I just always played it. And then the funny thing is that like, sometimes I would play it and I'd put in a quarter and I'd die, or I'll play something else and I'd look around and I'd come back and play again. And it was like the exact same part I just played, but I died, I had to start over. And every single time, for some reason, like I always played it. I never did anything else. And now I realize that like I wasted so much, I wasted a lot of time deciding. I guess, well, I was trying to waste time, but there was a lot of time I could have spent playing that I just spent on, that I could have spent on the game, but I didn't. And there's a lot of time when I could have just done in like I could have just kept playing the game. I kept stopping and starting over because I kept thinking, oh, I'll play something else, but I didn't, and I just kept coming back. And every single time I just came back to the same game. And I should have known going in like this is what I'm gonna do, but for some reason I kept telling myself, no, there's other options. No, there's other things I might want to do instead. But in the end, like I knew what I love. I love The Simpsons. If you ask any of my close friends, they'll tell you I love The Simpsons. Even now, when it's like not that good and like it's not as funny, I still love the show. And so I could save a lot of time, energy, and like just that trouble of making a decision if I just went straight to the game that I always went to, the game that I always played, the one that that I knew that I would enjoy the most. And like in the same way, in this decision that we have, in this decision of will we serve God, we know what the right choice is. We know what we should do. We know what the right choice is that we should follow. But as people are prone to do, we're scared of commitment. We're scared of this idea that we have to serve God all the time. We look around all the different things that are around us, all the different stuff that this world offers us, and we think, why not? Why not just try these things for a little while? I'm sure for the Israelites, as they went in, there must have been some advantages, just a little bit, to worshiping other gods. I'm sure the other tribes would have given them, would have done better business with them if they worshiped the same gods. Or if, they would have just treated them nicer at least. But they knew that no matter how hard it gets, no matter, what the hardship is, we have to serve our God. We have to serve the God that's brought us here and taken care of us. And so, I challenge all of us to do what the Israelites did. Look at our past. Look at what God has done for us. Look at our present. Look at where we are now and where God has placed us. And look at our future. Look at what God has promised us. Look at what God wants to give us if we stick with Him. And make our decision and choose God. Choose the one that will be there for us. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, this is a huge decision. If we really want to serve you, and I pray that all of us here can make the right choice, which is to follow you, because you're the only way that we can fully live our lives to its full potential. I pray that you just be with everyone here. Help us to really just every day make a choice to follow you, to serve you, and to live this life with you. So please be with us this Sabbath. In your word, pray. Amen.
There's a peace I've come to know, though my heart and flesh may fail. There's an anchor for my soul. I can say it is well. Jesus has overcome. Your grace has overwhelmed. The victory is won. He is risen from the dead. Now will